We run large-scale competitions as a means to drive capital towards innovation. I'm hanging out with $101 million in my back pocket, just waiting for somebody to share their idea. We want to see the next big thing. We would love to award like the biggest breakthrough. But the truth is we're doing testing in humans. Some of it's dangerous. Yeah. There's a lot of energy, a lot of momentum, and a lot of interest around the crystals and pheromones of Jesus. This is a global competition. We had 726 teams that had started their registrations from 71 countries.
I'm under the impression that some of the teams that made that top, whatever it is, are doing gene therapy on secret islands. Yes, there are these clinics doing things that are not approved. Some of them are doing them legally offshore. Some of them are doing them illegally offshore in the United States.
There is very much the Wild West, and what's real is what you can sell.
Hey everyone, look who I ran into at the Longevity Investors Conference in Gstaad. It is Jamie Justice, the power behind the XPRIZE, who is organizing, running. I'll let you tell everyone exactly what you're doing at the Healthspan XPRIZE. So I'm super excited to dive into that, as well as how you got there, your background research before you got there. I know you were involved in the TAME trial, which is another big project of interest. So I'm just looking forward to this conversation, and we'll see where we go.
Yeah, so I'd say, you've nailed it, as I'm a glutton for punishment. So of taking on tasks that feel, more challenging than just sort of a very simple, structured next research project. And somehow I keep surviving. So I would say my official title is I'm the Executive Vice President for Health and the Executive Director of the $101 million XPRIZE Healthspan competition. I feel more like I'm a symphony director. I'm a conductor. And so, direction is some of it's leading from the front, some's from behind. And I do that by bringing together what I would say is the most credible, most talented teams around me, from advisors, judges, partners.
Great. Yeah. Can you just take us through what is XPRIZE? So it's a nonprofit foundation. Right. And how is it structured? How did it come to be? And then there's the Healthspan component. So how does that fit into the sort of overall?
Yeah, absolutely. So I had never heard of XPRIZE. I was actually headhunted a couple of years ago. So out of a lab working as a scientist, working in the space. And I actually had to Google XPRIZE to see. It just sounded something kooky, like X Games. Maybe what are they doing? And
it's like kids on motocross and snowboards or something.
Yeah. I didn't know exactly what this thing was. Like, is there a Doritos commercial happening or Red Bull anywhere? But it wasn't. So it's XPRIZE, like solve for X. So try to figure out solutions to humanity's greatest problems. And it had actually been around for over 30 years, even though I'd never heard of it. A lot of people have. So they've done a lot of good in 30 years. It actually started with space exploration. And this was in a time in the 1990s when commercial space was not a thing. Right. It was federal governments were in that business, and there was no business of space. And so this was Peter Diamandis and the Ansari family. Actually, Anusha Ansari is now our CEO. And so she actually runs the foundation. She's a brilliant leader. She is part of the reason that I joined XPRIZE. She is, again, a phenomenal leader.
And what is the mission of the foundation?
Great. And so XPRIZE Foundation, what we do is we run large-scale competitions as a means to drive capital towards innovation. So I would put us really in a category of nonprofit strategic philanthropy. Mm-hmm. And so it's an alternative money kind of model. So it's a way to fund science and research within specific target areas. And we do that, again, either strict philanthropy. We have a lot of people who do donate to XPRIZE in any number of regions or areas of interest, from space to climate to biodiversity to I oversee everything within health and biomedicine. We also have learning and society. So there's areas for doing sort of innovation within education systems and beyond.
And is it all prize-based?
Yeah. So we are primarily primarily prize-based. So I would put us at 90 to 95% prize in using the competition model to drive innovation. But there are other programs. So one of the educational programs is something called Connect, which actually brings it to education systems. So middle schools, high schools, that they can use, again, thinking about using this prize as a way to teach innovation, tech, engineering, and entrepreneurship. So leading people into how do you design and think sort of moonshot projects, think beyond where you are now. And it also is a really great tool for, again, bringing hope and positivity back in, is that there is really a need for that as we can look around, whether we're talking about climate, talking about our planet, or talking about our health, can get really gloom and doom. And so it's a way to go not just into the barrier and the problem and worship the problem, but really open and sort of expand and see positive futures.
Great. And how did we get to an XPRIZE Healthspan? Oh,
so XPRIZE Healthspan, when I joined XPRIZE, it was already a half-formed vision, is that they had raised over $100 million. And by they, it was primarily Peter Diamandis, who is the founder of XPRIZE. He's no longer an employee of XPRIZE, but he is the chairman of the board and founder. But he has had a long interest in health and longevity. He's had, close friendships with people within the field, from Aubrey de Grey, Sergey Young, and many others.
He has a book on longevity.
He has a few books on longevity, and has a close interest, both his own personal health, his own personal brand, and, certainly a lot of investments in the space and a lot of companies that are within his control and clinics. And so for a lot of those reasons, I'm really careful to say he is no longer an employee at XPRIZE, is that he has way too many interests, and in order to keep the integrity and the clarity of our prizes, that we have to really keep a lot of those outside interests out.
Great.
Is that we look at the solutions, and again, the focus and the mission of XPRIZE is on impact.
Right. I want to come back to that, but just kind of set the stage. So Peter was sort of interested in the space. Probably thought he wanted to have a prize around longevity or aging or whatever he was calling it at that time. How did we end up at what it looks like now? And also, what does it look like now? I mean, obviously, we want to talk about it.
Yeah. So again, where Peter originally, some of his vision was really around longevity, and how do we extend our lifespan? And that was a driver for him personally in his personal brand. And when they first started toying around with this idea around 15 years ago is, he said human, it has to be in humans. That was the first goal, is that there's a lot of issues, and trying to think about, at least in terms of the public, building public awareness and changing public perception that this is doable. I would say animal models for me as a scientist are outstanding, but when trying to convince and convey to the public that this is something possible, doable, and in humans, is that you actually have to do the rigorous testing in people. But doing like a lifespan study in people is absolutely not practical, and probably not the most meaningful thing to people. We're really talking about health. So it actually took about another 10 to 15 years for momentum within the field. Is again, not geroscience had been a thing before this, at least the founding, the field, the work, but to actually have it catch on and have it come into a way that people could actually start envisioning that there may be something there, having, things like the interventions testing program and others that you start seeing, like rapamycin works in male and female. You can start when they're young, it starts when they're older. And that there was a lot of momentum building, that this is something that's feasible, not just in animals, but actually has some practical use. And so around that time, Sergey Young, who's another, again, an investor, a funder, and a huge advocate within the field.
Popularizer to some extent.
Yeah, the popularizer to that extent, exactly, is that he actually put up the first money. And so he put in the first $500,000 to start the prize. They started some design work. The earliest design was with an epigenetic clock as the readout. And so this was the original concept. Fortunately, by the time A came on, is that we'd already started pivoting away. And so some of this was one of our first funders was the Hevolution Foundation, and that they had a real mission towards healthspan of looking beyond that, and that the epigenetic clock was not going to be enough. And so if we're really changing public perception, is you have to have something that's meaningful to people. It needs to be salient, it needs to be telegenic. It actually has to have meaning, and it needs to have commercial success on the back end, which means you need a regulatory pathway. You have to have a market. You have to be able to demonstrate this in a way that means something.
So let me ask you about that. So why is the commercial success component necessary for a prize?
Right. So commercial success, I would say it is one piece of, is that when we're looking at impact, commercial success is one pathway to get to impact, is you want to have something that can be scalable, that's approachable, that can be used. Sure. And that often, certainly there could be a business model on the back end. So commercial success becomes part of it. For us, when I'm thinking about impact, is that it's less about how much money would be made back as much as we would think about scale and accessibility. Right. And so when I've stepped in to design the prize, is that really looking more as that is what's meaningful, what's salient, what could change regulatory policy, what can change public perception, and what's actually going to be used. So whether that's a commercial product, a repurposed agent, a lifestyle intervention, hands off on the solution. Right. And so this has been sort of my guiding principle is solution agnostic. We just need a start line and a finish line and begin to build the frameworks out.
Got it. Okay. So there's a prize. Take us through how this works, right? So how do you win the prize?
Yeah.
What is the prize?
Again, this is great. So contrary to popularity, can I just tell you how many times since I've started at XPRIZE, I've been pitched and sold and done more times than I could possibly tell you. I've had somebody just pull me aside, like I'm hanging out with $101 million in my back pocket. This is, just waiting for somebody to share their idea.
There are lots of people in the field who have ideas that...
There are so many ideas. And there are some good ideas, and there are some spectacularly bad ideas, and I'm happy to talk about some of those on camera too. Really great stuff if you ever wanted to know what not to do.
Let's hear some bad ideas, but let's save that for later.
We're going to come back. Yeah. So what do teams actually have to do? And so this is what's unique about a competition than like a grant fund or even a VC fund or something else, is that we put money at demonstration, and so we've had to set up demonstration points. So the first one is like a pen and paper. People submitted something to us to show us their R&D, what they've done before. These can be academics. We even have high school groups and middle school groups competing. I mean, anyone with an idea.
I'm going to love it if a high school
I would be so excited.
Student wins the XPRIZE.
I would be so excited. So, I mean, we really do. We have some really great, and actually our first milestone was on that pen and paper selection. We put together an independent panel of judges. And so this is, at our first round, we had 13. We had so many applications. We now bumped it up to 15 judges and some ad hocs that come in for specific areas.
And are you able to say who the judges are?
Yeah. So our judges are public. And so I was really careful in looking at the balance of the judging composition, is that we're a split between academic and industry. The industry is pretty broad, so it can be people that either have experience in large pharma. So we have the former head of the J&J vaccine program is on our judging panel. He's outstanding. Kenny Simmons. Kenny, we love you. And then we have, clinic leaders. We have folks that have, an interest in funding and journalism. We have, again, academic scientists. So I have one of my former colleagues and mentors, Steve Krzyzewski, who was with me on the TAME trial, has been really part of how do you scale interventions? What do you test? How do you test them? Regulatory side. So he is also one of our judges. We have folks from the Alzheimer's Association. We have immunologists, and we have done a really careful split, not only from academic and industry, but various fields. So we have immunologists, cognitive and brain experts, folks that are really focused on muscle. We have others with clinic experience. And again, really broad spectrum, half in the US, half international, because this is a global competition. Yeah. And so right now we're still open for registration. We had last week, This is in September. We had 726 teams that had started their registrations from 71 countries.
Wow.
Out of those, we have some great ideas and some bad ones. But all of the teams now, again, we did our first round. We named our top 100. We awarded our top 40. We did that in May of 2025. So the top 40 all got $250,000 US. It's a token of our appreciation.
So that doesn't mean the people who weren't in the top 40 are out, though, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay.
So teams who are qualified are continued, and we call them semi-finalists. And so what they're required to do now, and we are already getting the panicked calls about timelines, is they have to get their regulatory paperwork. They have to get a clinic onboarded. They actually have to recruit their first 5 to say 10 people and run we call a POC trial. They have to show proof of concept, see that their idea is POCable. And so that's really looking wherever they're coming in, whether it's they're looking at pharmacokinetics, pharmacodynamics. They might actually be doing an early kind of step up to an efficacy trial. They may be testing already in a disease population, and they want to see if maybe what they're working on for cancer
could have broader
effects.
Yep.
And so we let them come in from wherever they're at and assemble the team that they need to get there. So that's what we're all working on now. So by April of 2026, they'll submit not just their finals application to say, hey, this is what we learned, this is what we're going to do to run a 1-year trial. They actually have to submit de-identified data. They have to submit their recruitment, their inclusion and enrollment reports so that we can see, did they recruit people? How was their screening? Who's actually enrolled? And then they, need to do, again, analyze their data for us, send us their data reports. So not just can they collect data, which is actually important for us. When these teams go to finals, we're going to have a centralized data management center. We have a data coordinating center. They have to run prospective trials. They have to be able to follow a protocol. They need to be able to submit raw data. And we need to show that they're able to not just submit it, but to be able to interpret it so that if they're doing decision making, it's there.
And I mean, all of that sounds easy when you say it, yet anybody who has ever had any experience with a clinical trial will know exactly how difficult all of that is. So I imagine you will have a lot of teams wash out because they just aren't able to meet those criteria.
I expect 50% or just drop because they don't make the timeline.
Let's take a step back though, because I want to make sure that the sort of overarching framework is clear here. So anybody in principle can apply to compete.
That's right.
It has to be in humans.
Yes.
They have to do a clinical trial.
Correct.
And they have to be able, and the winner will be able to show that they have positively impacted healthspan. What does that last part mean?
So this last part has been, again, this is what got me out of the lab. It was to this is the work that we had been trying to do, right? So we had started this trying to work on the TAME trial. We started this with a translational geroscience network. It's to get frameworks around how are we defining this in people. Yeah. And again, I've already told you it's not an epigenetic clock.
Right. Alone, at least.
Alone, not alone. And so what we're asking people to do is that we actually went back, and this is work that I started even at Wake Forest before coming over, is that we had started doing focus groups and thinking about outcomes. And when you ask people what is meaningful to them, the people are really afraid of Alzheimer's disease and loss of cognitive function. Number one driver of what they want to maintain. Number 2 is physical function. I want to play with my grandkids, maintain independence, be able to walk a grocery store and remember my grocery list at the same time.
Right.
And then 2, we were planning this prize just after a large global pandemic. You might have heard of it. And people realize just like maybe your immune system's important and that you could have all of those things, but if you're not resilient enough to walk outside and be exposed to something and recover from it, really it's another way of looking at engagement. And so we looked at these 3 aspects of pillars that were simple, that could be tested, could likely show an improvement in 1 year, because this is one of those other keys. Unlike a TAME trial, which we were looking at prevention and primary.
We'll talk about TAME and the details of that.
So that's like disease and that's prevention. And so these are short-term trials because these are 1-year trials, and that they have to show within a person that they are able to improve and not just one area of function, but show what we call a plurality of effect. And so that's one of the keys when thinking about aging, which is very multidimensional. You have a lot of individual variability, but you also have a lot of dependence between these elements, and that we actually want to show that it's not a simple disease state, is that we're really improving some underlying sort of latent quality that we might call our biologic age or our health span, or there's a lot of other ways to define it. Sure. We're simply calling it muscle cognitive immune function.
So you have to see an improvement in function.
Improvement.
Okay, got it.
And so this is the huge differentiator.
And how much improvement?
So that's what we're working on now. So we have set out the guidelines, say 10, 15, 20 years, is that you have to do an offset.
Right.
And
that's based on population average changes in function.
And so, and I've said this many times, and I'm happy to say it on camera or anywhere else, it was arbitrary. Right?
You mean 10, 15, or 20?
They are. And so when we're looking at that, what that requires us to now do is to go back and do the modeling behind it. And so we have actually set out, we've worked with AFAR, so American Federation for Aging Research. They partnered with us, outstanding, and that we actually use some of our operational costs to put out a grant program. So we now have a couple of data centers who are actually working and doing the modeling, building out the frameworks with us so that we can actually say, okay, what is 10, 15, or 20 years change in a referent cohort?
Right.
What does it look like?
How do you deal? I mean, that makes perfect sense. And it makes sense that you're still sort of nailing that down. Yeah. But how do you deal with the likelihood that the cohorts across teams are going to be very different?
Oh, they're going to be hugely different.
One group may have a cohort that is functionally impaired in all three domains at the start. In fact, if I was doing this, which I'm not yet, I guess since it's still open, I guess I should never say never. But if I was designing this, I mean, to give yourself the highest likelihood of seeing an improvement, you start with people who are lower functioning to begin with, would be a strategy.
If I were testing, I would do the same, is that I would find some level of impairment, right, that you would be able to show an improvement. Right. But identifying exactly what that is and where you are sort of on the precipice of have they gone too far? And now
it's going to be different, like the starting point's going to be different. So I guess that's the question I'm wondering. It's a hard problem.
Which is great.
I don't know how you, because you want to have standardized assessments across the teams as best you can. I guess ultimately, and again, correct me if I'm wrong or speak more on this, ultimately, do you think this will be a clear yes, no, we accomplished it or not? Or will judges have to be involved to make a decision about who's the winner?
The judges are absolutely involved. Very much. So they're involved in establishing sort of what that reference looks like, what that magnitude of effect needs to be. And so we're going to do the modeling and give this back to them. And it's going to be separated, of course, by age and by sex. And so those are going to be some of the starting criteria. So if somebody enters the trial at, say, the age of 60 versus the age of 75, like what 10, 15, 20 years looks like might be a little bit different. And so we will account for sort of their starting 5 to 10 year decade, whatever that is. And some of the modeling will actually show that. But it is the person relative to themselves. And so this is a little different than a standard trial. Every individual gets analyzed? That's right. And so all of the trials are going to be run as single crossover trials. There's still randomization. There still is a control placebo or something. So explain how that works for people who may not be familiar with crossover. Yeah, so this is a little different. So the crossover means typically in a standard, what we would call a crossover trial is that there's usually two conditions, like you are on drug A or placebo, and that you're going to be randomized to either start on one and then cross to the other or vice versa. Right. And what we call this is as a single crossover means that we're taking these people, they're coming in, and part of our standard protocols is they have to be tested repeatedly. Just on their own, just their normal condition, so we can see their normal variation, their baseline. And so they do this at least 3 times, and then the teams can randomize them to either condition. Then they go on to whatever that program is. It can be personalized, can be a standard drug trial, could be anything in between. We don't tell the teams what to do. And then starting at about 10 months later, they're tested again, 1, 2, 3. And that reference threshold is for their age, for their sex, what degree of improvement would equate for that general against the referent population. They have to exceed a magnitude like a % change of X. And we have some of these, and they have to do this across measures, so 2 to 3 measures per domain.
How is this a crossover, though? That's what I don't understand.
So they're crossing over from their own baseline.
I see.
And so the crossover is only important for the statistics that happen on the back end. is that by having these as a crossover, it's just meaning that they're relative to their own control. And so they're either a responder or a non-responder at each level.
But it is randomized in the sense that half or some proportion of people will not get the intervention at all.
That is correct. Yes. And that the not get it at all is also one of these things that we've talked to our judges, and it's in some of our guidelines. Like if somebody is doing an exercise intervention, is that the control group not getting the intervention should still also be, they need to be told the WHO, World Health Organization guidelines, is that it can't be just holding people sedentary or, it's like...
You can't tell the placebo group, we want you to sit on the couch for 12 hours a day.
Right. Right. If you have a diet intervention that you're inducing weight loss in one group, you can't tell the other group, and here's some Cheetos, like go have at it and we'll see you in 12 months. Like that's not a sufficient comparator.
Yeah. Okay. So that I think really sets the stage well. So, again, just simplistically tell me if this is where things stand. So anybody can apply.
Yep.
And the intervention can in principle be anything as long as it can be done ethically with appropriate approvals. Every group designs their own clinical trial structure, but it has to meet the criteria you laid out, 3 baseline measurements, certain timing, all of that. The details beyond that can be, each group can do it. There was a starting point where early groups submitted their proposals. You select, did you select at that point, or did you let everybody? You must have had some that you just threw out, but you selected some. I want to hear about those, but you selected most of them, I'm assuming. And then you had a milestone point where you awarded prizes to support the teams or reward the teams that had performed best up to that point. What was that milestone point that they had to get to, and how were those chosen?
Excellent. So this looked like, if we have any academics that are listening, it looked a little like a grant review. So a review of proposals. People submitted to us things that they've done. They showed their preliminary data to date. They talked about the mechanisms they were going to target. They talked about their team. So, both their expertise, what clinic they were working with, what kind of resources they had. They gave us some suggestion that they had an idea, that they had some level of evidence behind it that this would work, whether that was in silico, animal models, early stage testing in clinic and other disease conditions. We no holds bars, anything's open. And so that was, those submissions came in. Our judges were looking at those based on the quality of the evidence that came in. They prioritized innovation. They also really looked at feasibility. So this was a key for them.
Sure, that's got to be. Because a lot of it isn't going to be. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so they looked really, really carefully there. They were also, our judges were really interested in scalability and access.
Oh, interesting.
Right? So they want to show, is this going to make a difference? Because we run prizes for impact.
Yeah.
I think the least impactful thing we're going to do is actually give away money, and our judges got that.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you maybe a challenging question, although I don't think it will be, and maybe I'm wrong. I'm under the impression that some of the teams that made that top whatever it is are doing gene therapy on secret islands, right? How is that scalable?
It's not.
So the judges, it wasn't a requirement.
No, it's not. It was a judge consideration. What our judges did great on the first round is that they gave us a breadth of teams that reflected the entire pool. So we had both highly innovative. We had things that the judges were like, I don't think this is going to be work, but let's give them the next round and see what happens. There were others that they said, this was a really cool idea. I don't think they're going to get to trials. And so let's just see if they can get out of animals and get approvals, And then there were others that were just outstanding, that great public health kind of measures, like going into the community, doing things, behavioral, others that it's okay, those are great ideas. I would love to see those tested relative to some of these more innovative things so that you can actually start to have comparative approaches measured on the same yardstick.
I'm glad you brought that up because, again, first of all, this, I've told you this and I've said it publicly, but I am so, first of all, thrilled that you took over the position that you did and that this prize ended up where it ended up with meaningful, realistic, rigorous endpoints, because I was concerned that it wouldn't end up there. Could have gone the other way. So anyways, So I think you guys ended up at a very good place. And my first thought when I heard these endpoints is, well, if you take a sedentary, obese population of people who aren't exercising, not sleeping well, drinking too much alcohol, and, sitting in their rooms by themselves all the time, and you just get them to fix those things, you're going to move the needle 15 years of biological age. I'm guessing. But I'm glad you said the public health stuff, because that's not easy. I'm not trying to trivialize
That's exactly
at all.
it. I was going to say, if you can figure out how to do that in a sustainable way for 1 year and that it's accessible and that it has potential, I would be delighted to award that $81 million for the finals. So, that's like, if you can demonstrate it, what a win would that be? And so, I think that's one of the beauties of the competition is that I don't have a dog in the fight on which one of these wins. I would like to see something happen to get some real proof, whether it's things that our grandmother told us to do, whether it's the timing of how we dose things according to, our circadian rhythms, which we do have a team that's doing that. And they're doing it in a very rigorous way. Is if you have managed chronic conditions and you simply time them better and then add some of these other approaches, is that they think that they can bring the management of current diseases into a way that actually supports healthspan in a meaningful, demonstrable way.
That's interesting. Yeah.
And so again, which of those and out of all of the approaches win? No dog in the fight. Or if it's something like we have mitochondrial transplants, we do have some teams with gene therapies, and some of those are already in clinic. And so again, I think you and I have talked about this. This is one of those things in the field. It's not that they're approved. It's not that they're regulated. And in many cases, they don't have solid data behind a few case studies here and there. And so if this is a chance for us to begin educating clinics on how to collect data, how to be rigorous, and how to be transparent, great. Some of our teams that are actually, and some of these were awarded, others might have just missed the awarding, but there are some that are doing sort of novel, either triple gene packages or other gene therapies or, RNA-based therapeutics. Like there's a lot of things that are out there right now. Certainly on the gene therapy side, we saw several that came in on applications that are already administering those kind of therapies in a clinic, perhaps not in the U.S., maybe Honduras, maybe they're other off-site, and they're already there, and they submitted case study data to us. And so, if this is a chance for us to go in and start really working with teams that are already doing things in a clinic and have them start collecting data, getting regulatory approval, and start doing this in a very dedicated, rigorous way, and submitting those data in so that they can go under scrutiny, I think that could be a real pathway. Whether we're talking about peptides, which right now is the Wild West,
but
gene
also
therapy,
really
cell
interesting.
therapies. They could be the next thing. Yeah. And so this is also a chance for us. Public awareness is not just for, the general public, the lay audience, our mothers, grandmothers, cousins. It's also for our fellows that are out there in clinics, scientists, students, others.
I agree completely. I wonder, and one of the things I've been concerned about and commented on is the lack of transparency, right? So yes, there are these clinics doing things that are not approved. Some of them are doing them legally offshore. Some of them are doing them illegally offshore in the United States. But the problem is, and these things might work, right? Some of them have very plausible biological mechanisms. One of the problems is we have no way to validate efficacy. So certainly these clinics will do case reports where they say, it increased muscle mass in this person by 20% or whatever. But what we don't hear about is the person who came in, had a terrible inflammatory reaction, almost died, right?
100%.
So I'm very in favor of collecting all the data and then just let's figure out what works, what doesn't work, what do the side effects look like. How in your platform are you going to ensure that all of the data actually makes it there? Right.
So we do have, this is one of the strengths. So we're going to be working with the University of Utah as a data coordinating center. One of the strengths when they were pitching, we were working with them and trying to figure out a partnership, is that they do have some ways for prospective multi-center trials that are already in play, that they can go through and actually look at some of the recruitment numbers and some of the screening numbers, that you can start to detect patterns where there might be people missing from record. That might have been screened out or removed. And so once the teams go into finals, right now, the teams are really at their liberty to do what they do.
Yeah, it hasn't really started. If I understand correctly, the actual competition hasn't really started.
Finals begins in 2026. Okay. Right now, this is still like a long preamble. It's almost like this is a run-in for the finals.
Right.
Is they have to show us they can do that.
And let me make sure I understand, because we had this conversation earlier that people can even still register, right?
They can.
So even though you didn't make it in the top 40 or you haven't even submitted anything yet, if you can get to the criteria that are needed to get
That's right.
to show you can do this.
That's right.
By what's the date?
April 13th of 2026.
2026. You can still get in.
That's right.
Okay. So
yeah, I will say our judges are being harsh. So,
they should be. Yeah, of course.
And the teams that come in late, they don't miss anything. They have to submit everything just like everyone else before. So there's nothing getting waived if they come in late. So they still put in the qualifying submission. They actually have a two-step process. They have to contact me first and we do an administrative review. If we give them the pass on that stage, then they can put in their full qualifying submission. They have until March to do that step so that we have time to review it, gets it back to our judges. Then they could submit their full application by April. And so everybody comes in April. Our judges so far have been pretty strict. So over the last year, we've had about another 100 people start their registration. Out of those, we've had, 30 or 40 full submissions or that are nearing full submission. I think our judges have approved 2 teams. So again, they really, they've now learned the burden of saying yes to lots and lots of people, is that they want to make sure that those are going to go to finals actually have a chance at going to finals.
How many teams do you think, I know you have to project a little bit, are going to make it to finals?
Yeah. So, out of the first round, we ended up with 100 qualified teams. Many of those had solutions that they have some animal evidence. Maybe they're doing AI beast drug screening, which was actually really cool. It was hard to judge in first round, but if any of those, they could have potential. They could still go forward. Out of the top 40, I'm guessing about half of our first cohort are not even going to bother submitting because they don't get to trials. So if I get 40 to 50 solid applications for finals with data that goes with them, because those are some of the criteria to pass on for me to give them to judges, and regulatory approval, I need that. With those, I'm guessing 40 or 50 max, and they're going to whittle those down to the top 10. And so top 10 will get awarded for finals. So 10 will start finals with us. If there are other teams who don't get the finals, they would still have the option to continue, but we give the top 10 teams $1 million,
right, so they just don't
help
get
offset the
money.
cost.
Yeah, right.
And the teams coming in late, they also would need to contract then with the data coordinating center because to be considered
to pay
for
the
finals,
data coordinating center?
Right.
Yeah.
And so again, but if it's a team who's coming in late, maybe they don't want to show that they're in the competition yet for whatever reason. They're kind of being stealth. They may opt to do that. And if they think they really have like the thing, great.
Okay. So you're anticipating actually in the finals, 10 plus maybe a few that pay for it on their own.
I would say 5 max on the other side, but I could be surprised.
So at the end of the day, what we should get out of this is 10 to 15 year-long clinical trials testing 10 to 15 different putative health span interventions.
And slightly different populations.
Sure, right.
Yeah.
And what size are the clinical trials?
So the clinical trials, for feasibility, we would put a cap on it of around 200. I think realistically, and the way that we've redesigned and restructured the data, is that we would like to get 100 subjects that complete the trials per team. And so that would be, a complete data set of 1,000 to 1,500. And so, within each team, they would need to have a proportion like, 30% responders per milestone in order to be considered this group wins for that category. So
sorry, I don't quite understand that.
Yeah. So sorry, this is tough. Yeah. So this is without sort of mapping it out behind me. It's a little bit hard to see. So if a team comes in and they have 100 people in their trial, maybe they're going to do a 50-50 randomization, right? So they have 50 people in a treated group, 50 people who are not. Out of that 50 people who are treated, they would need to show, and again, it's up to our judges to say whether it's going to be the, 20% or 30%. 30% is hard. Like that is more rigorous than a standard, randomized controlled trial where you're looking at the mean change. 30% responders at the categories that we're putting them at is hard. And so they need to show that 30% are able to not just improve, but improve to such a degree that that our judges will look at and go like, wow, that is a blockbuster happening.
I mean, I get it now. That's interesting.
Yeah.
So it's not only that you have to show a certain level of health span improvement within domains, but you have to have also a certain proportion of the population achieve that. So I was going to ask, how do you get the statistical power from 100 people or 50 people for like the traditional types of analyses. This is a very different way of assessing efficacy.
It is. And this is the way that we could constrain it for a competition.
Yeah, sure. Makes perfect sense.
It's much more robust to different therapeutics. It's much more robust to different populations. And it's what we can do. And it's actually ultimately, I would love to see the way that we practice clinical trials change, especially for early stage trials. And I think that this is a great model that you could test and that you can do it feasibly. And we're showing them in 1-year trials. I'd love to get a midpoint in there to show it's like, my gosh, if we could do this and we show that actually that midpoint visit
just as informative,
it projects out to 1 year and you could start running leaner, shorter trials. Fabulous.
Cool. Has there been any conversations with FDA? I know they're obviously not going to accept the outcomes of these trials for approval, but starting the conversation, is this something that if it works well, you would consider building into the approval process and accelerate timelines?
We would love to. And so this was actually, we did go in and submit our first ideas when we started pitching this around, is that we actually were able to make a great contact. There's not a desk at the FDA that any of this sits.
Yeah, you and I had this conversation and why don't you talk about that? I think most people aren't going to understand this, and I wasn't really aware of this either.
Right. So the FDA is not set up where they're like hanging out saying like, wow, let's really look across all these diseases and let's help work with you in an innovative way to get your testing done. That's not what they do. You bring them an idea. They vet it and see if it sort of fits within their category. They give you advice back on, yes, we would accept that outcome or we wouldn't. Or, for many if you're doing like a phase 2 trial, which is for this what we're proposing in the prize is very similar to the sort of phase 2. Right.
Safety's already been established. Actually, before we talk more about FDA, this is what I wanted to ask you is just, do the interventions have to have already shown some, say, phase 1 level of safety before they're even allowed by the judges in?
Ideally. That's what we would suggest that they're doing right now.
I see.
Many of them, when they're at least...
So to get to the final stage.
Yeah.
So the triple combination gene therapy, probably not there yet?
We're gonna let them submit to our judges. And again, I'm gonna hold tongue on that one because I don't get a seat at the judges table. Yeah. I get to populate the panel and then I sit in the room next to them if they have questions.
So the judges have to, though, agree that some level of safety has been established.
Right.
And I guess you're hoping they do a good job at that?
Yeah, we would hope they do a good job at that, and that each of the teams has to go in with their institutional review board or IRB, whoever their ethics and safety board is, that says,
yes, you can do this. So that should be another body. Yeah, got it.
And again, this is a global competition, so not everybody has the same IRB, so there will be a little bit of judgment call, but we do make sure that they abide by their local regulations. And that if they do have an agent that undergoes further regulatory scrutiny, whether that's the FDA in the US or the EMA, so the European version, or, I just lost the acronym for the Japanese group, but wherever they are, they have to meet that level. And that there are some things that just simply aren't regulated, like lifestyle intervention. That's fine. And so we can't draw too hard a line on exactly what they need. But yes, they have to show us that they have approval for what they've done. They have to show us that they can obtain approval and they know the process to go to get there for finals. And that we will, because we will have a central data management center. We actually got turned down by 2 central IRBs that said, if they have their own IRB, they don't need a central IRB. But I think we're going to get one anyway. I mean, I have, just because we want to make sure that all of this is done ethically and with safety in mind.
Absolutely. So sorry, I sidetracked you from the FDA story.
Yeah.
I think
so the
safety question is super important.
So important. It's so important. Because, some of these things, we can get really gung-ho on innovation, right? Is that we want to see the next big thing. We would love to award like the biggest breakthrough. Of course. But the truth is we're doing testing in humans, is that we have to be really practical and we have to understand that what we need to do is feasible. And that, with snake oil, some snake oil is just you're wasting your money and you're going to pee it out. Some of it's dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure.
And so, we are taking a bit of risk in pushing innovation, and that we allow some of that risk to be there. But as long as it's done in a way that any of the human participants that are engaging in the competition understand that level of risk and are willing to accept it, depending on the paradigm in which they're being tested. And so, we're really going to be looking at, do the participants in this trial understand what they're signing up for, no matter what it is? And is there a review board who's watching that very closely? And then we'll have sort of the 1,000-foot view across all. But again, we're going to have a central data system, which will be great. They will have to record events in it. We will be collecting bloods and storing them centrally. We will be doing safety labs centrally. And so that we'll have some of that monitoring that we can go back to.
It'll be really interesting to see who lands in the finals, because I think your intuition is correct that a lot of these more questionable teams are not going to be able to meet all of those rigorous requirements. But it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah. And I would say, for us is that has drawn praise, and it has also drawn, some backlash even within our own field, is that I've had investors in particular and others that have looked at our top 40 list and said, I just don't see anything exciting.
Yeah. Right.
And
I understand that.
You're right. Some of it's not, some of it is, some of it stands to be proven.
Right.
But I think that there are some approaches that are actually really worth looking at.
Yeah. And I mean, again, I get that. I understand that idea that I don't see anything exciting, because what they're probably not seeing are things they haven't heard of yet. And I think it's really important not to minimize the impact of a proven intervention that improves health span by 10 years or 20 years. That's huge compared to what we have today. So sure, maybe it's not the latest, greatest reprogramming, gene therapy, whatever. But if it works, that's a big deal.
Yeah. And gene therapies, I would say over the last couple of years, people have become really tepid. Right? That there's some fear, and, what's the commercial viability? What's are they reimbursable? And when we're thinking about them not in a disease condition, that changes some of the risk benefit ratio.
It does. And again, my own perspective is I'm actually moderately bullish on, gene therapy is just a technology, right? It's a way of delivering biologically active components to modify your system, right? So from that perspective, it's a really powerful technology, because if you know what you want to do, it's much easier to find an intervention that will do that. So I think it's very powerful, but I think it sort of gets lumped in, the longevity gene therapy, which, first of all, we have no idea of what to do in terms of gene therapy to improve longevity. In fact, this is an aside, but I heard somebody at this conference say that we already know all the genes for human longevity. I'm like, what world are you living in? We know a few that probably have an impact on human longevity.
Right.
So I think there's a lot of misunderstanding, particularly among the investor community, as to exactly where the science is at in this space.
And in talking to scientists who are really, doing dedicated work in this area, and there are some very good ones. So I don't want to poo-poo gene therapy. And they're the first ones who pulled me aside, and they're like, we would love to do this. I think we would have something that really targets muscle.
Yeah. Right.
But, but again, these gene therapies, they are typically very targeted. And so if you're doing something that's targeting one system, the basis that we're putting for this, right, is it has to have a plurality effect. You need to see it across. It can't be single disease. It can't be single organ. That's when we're talking about aging. We're talking about longevity. That's the holy grail, is that how do you do that, but without having major systemic side effects? And that right now the evidence maybe isn't quite there for that to be something that we're ready to deploy this year.
Yeah.
Is that there's going to be a lot of work.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, let's come back to FDA, because I think this is an important piece.
This is huge.
And I think you were just explaining the fact that at FDA, how the process works, and there isn't a person necessarily who's assigned to handle all of the longevity applications or something like that.
Or
right?
any of them.
Right.
Yeah, which is, so when, again, the FDA, what they are set up to do is safety, right? And so they're looking at anything that comes into them, any application, they're looking at, does the benefit of taking X outweigh the risk of taking X for condition Y?
Right.
And so it's all context of use, and it's for that intervention, for that condition. And so and again, for condition, there really are context of use is disease. So you're looking at a clinical outcome assessment. They call it a COA, right? And so that's what all of it's based on. So until we have an application set that gives them a context of use or a clinical outcome assessment that we collectively collectively as scientists call aging, health span, longevity, whatever that may be, they don't have a place for that to go. And so when you put in an application, it slides off the desk and it goes to whoever's desk is closest. And so that's where a lot of both, investors certainly to get a commercial return within 2 to 3 years, and also scientists for early stage testing of novel therapeutics. We end up testing these within disease conditions where you can show though that the benefit of taking it could outweigh the risk, that there's a condition and a place that it can go, and that you would look for a disease that has, that is associated with whatever perhaps the mechanism that you're targeting. So, having done this, did an early trial with idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. So this was back in my academic life, right? Is that we were doing a senolytic drug combination. Right. We started it with IPF, and, not that IPF is the best model for human longevity, but it was a senescence-associated disease that has really dire outcomes. The risk-benefit ratio kind of goes in this direction. And it was honestly, because we were also setting up to do additional preclinical animal tests with that combination. And then we found out that it was actually less regulatory burden to go straight into humans because it was repurposed. If you found the right place, and FDA took it, and we could get that because we weren't going for an indication at that stage. It was a proof of concept. So back to those pocketable short-term trials to show, is this an area we could go into? We followed that up with a short randomized trial. Did we replicate it? Hell no. Was it taken perhaps way out of context? Yeah. And was part of that us out of enthusiasm? Yeah. Didn't bear fruit. That's okay.
Interesting. So I want to come back to this, how FDA is working.
Yeah. So the FDA.
There was a concept I didn't appreciate, and you educated me on it. And so if I didn't appreciate it, I'm sure lots of other people don't as well. So I think there has been this perception, and it's been sort of, the TAME trial has, I think, contributed to this, others as well, that what we really need to do is come up with a clinical trial design that we can get FDA on board with to test geroscience interventions. And then once that's approved by FDA that you can do the trial, we can just substitute in other interventions. And that's not how it works. Yeah. So how does it work?
Again, so the two things that have to go together is you have that clinical outcome assessment, which having a TAME trial or a TAME-like trial,
or whatever the set of endpoints
is that you get this endpoint that the FDA is willing to at least go, yes, that holds together. It makes sense. Then, it's not enough for them to say that before the trial starts. You have to have a successful trial. So you actually have to show that endpoint can be met, and then you can do so within this sort of framework. And then it's not phenocopied, right?
That's what I did not appreciate.
No, because that's only one piece. That clinical outcome is only one piece. The other is the context of use. Is that it's always matching your drug or your therapeutic, your biologic, whatever it is for whatever your population is. Could be general aging, could not. And that you start testing that and then matching it back. It should hopefully make that process easier. You have to have precedent. And it is, it's a whole lot of eggs to put in one basket. And so there's always inherent risk with trying to be the first. It's often easier to be the second. We still need a trial with a strong outcome that is, again, an aging outcome, health span outcome, however you want to call it. Totally fine with that. And that, the FDA, I have to say, they're not the holdup there. It's us. So us being scientists, us being funders, is that there's a lot of risk in doing it.
I don't think it's the scientists, but I know what you mean.
Yeah.
I think the scientists play a role, but I think it's a lack of resources.
Well, yeah, it is.
And that's let's have that conversation too.
Well, and I think that's fine, and we ran into the issue was actually going through peer review, which is, again, it was as a funding source. The TAME trial ran into sort of an issue there, which is fine. And perhaps it's that, again, it always comes back, right? The outcome is one part. I think people were really hyped and really excited about having an outcome, but you get, clinical trial dogmatist having a multi-component, that kind of composite endpoint with clinical trial dogmatist. Woo.
Yeah. There's a whole, there's culture, there's conservatism, there's the way review panels work.
Right?
We're going to bore our audience if we bitch about review panels.
No, we're not going to do that.
All that goes into play.
But there was one really important that came out of that, is that the other thing that really tanked that during peer review was that we actually had, and again, very well stated within there, it wasn't just they didn't like the outcome. They didn't believe the geroscience hypothesis.
Yeah. We ran into that with the dog aging project too.
It could work on multiple outcomes.
This person should not be reviewing NIH grants that have anything to do with aging biology.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. And so whatever's happening with the TAME trial, it's been pivoted a few times. I don't know. I am hugely supportive. While we're doing the Healthspan, while there's the dog aging project, there should also still be a large phase 3 FDA facing trial. And pitching it around that again. Joan Manick did great work, sort of taking it towards immune, which I think is huge. And that was missing from the TAME trial. That could be an avenue. I think there's a lot of paths that could still be taken.
Yeah, I agree. So let's just give the background on the TAME trial for people who, I'm sure everybody's heard of it, targeting aging with metformin. You were directly involved in that project. Maybe tell us, first of all, what was the initial goal and structure of that trial, and then take us through in as much detail as you want to or feel comfortable. Let's hear about the drama. Like, we want the juice.
Oh, there was juice. There's a lot of juice. There was great. I mean, there could be whole chapters written about this, but there should
be a book about TAME once we know how this is going to end.
Oh, there should be. And it was one of the most useful thought experiments. And I think that it did a lot. It was the greatest, I wish we could coin the phrase, the greatest trial that never was. Yeah. And I hope would still someday could be, whether metformin or perhaps with a stronger, with something else. But, I got involved in this, shortly after a postdoc. I got pulled into something called the Geroscience Network, which I was originally pulled in because I've been doing work going from mouse to human, early stage testing. And I got pulled into one retreat doing that, had started doing work within that Geroscience Network. First, I was a recorder. So I would go into the meetings, retreats are happening, writing down everything, going back, writing the papers, super useful experience. And got put within a faculty exchange program to do that, early career. And that naturally segued out of those retreats. That's where the TAME trial was born, is that we said, okay, great. So you have this early translation, you have these kind of phase 2 trials, which is another area that I'd been sort of involved in and comfortable with. And then the next was, okay, but what we really need is this bigger, larger thing. And how do we go about designing it? So I had the great experience of being there sort of in the room as the sausage was getting made.
And had metformin already been selected at that point?
So metformin was proposed as one that we thought that would be the closest, simply because there was already so much clinical evidence. It was safe. It was easy to use. We could get it generic, and that we thought that it would be the most useful tool to go immediately to trial without needing all of those sort of proof of concept and preliminary studies and the rest of the work that other agents would go through. I do recall that there were not a lot of considerations for others. Senolytics at that time, like right now, everybody's talking about epigenetic reprogramming. 2013 to 2015, the whole world was senolytic. And the general consensus was not just no, but hell no, those aren't ready. Rapamycin, as you know, was coming out really strong, and there was a lot of concern that we would have to go back and do all of the initial studies.
Because of the concerns about safety and immune suppression.
Right, which is perhaps not as warranted in the
I think it's what we knew then versus what we know now.
Right. Yeah. And so, historically, yes, is that it was seen as probably the best tool for the moment. Mm-hmm. And so that was the one that went in. And so we began designing around that, which the tool that you use ends up influencing the outcomes that go through. So with that one, type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, those kind of things, they were actually really strongly of interest within that initial group. But going into the FDA, those got kicked out. As they said, metformin's already used for this. We already know, you're not going to have a prevention trial with that as part of the endpoints. And then the other is that there was concern. It was biochemically diagnosed, which the FDA also doesn't like. So it's easier to...
What does that mean?
This is important. So, again, type 2 diabetes is biochemically diagnosed. So meaning that you drew a blood test and you're looking at like A1C or some other metric, and that's your diagnosis base. And looking and working within the FDA, the easier easier things to adjudicate, meaning that they can look at your evidence and saying, yes, this happened, no, this didn't, because that's how they do, whether they're going to create an indication for that. Is that they need to show that, yes, there's a clinical event. No, there's not. You're not doing lifespan, so there's no toes test, right? With the mouse, toes are up.
Yeah, sure.
Toes are down.
Right.
Can't quite do that with humans. And so looking at the other diseases on the list, with all-cause mortality was one. You can show
That's
someone's dead,
unambiguous,
not dead. Cancer diagnosis, cancer, not cancer. Yeah. You could argue that one for sure. MCI dementia. So, those that they do have clinical definitions.
They do. It's a little squishy, but yeah.
It's a little squishy. And then certainly cardiovascular diseases. So did you have a heart attack? Myocardial infarction? Yes, no. Hospitalized heart failure? Yes, no.
That all makes sense, but still, again, I don't see the logic of not using a biochemical test when it is used especially when it's used in clinical practice. And we know with some degree of certainty that there is at least a very, very strong correlation with the disease outcome, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But so anyways, regardless of what our opinions are, FDA prefers something where it's a clinical diagnosis.
That's right.
Even if it's less quantitative than A1C or fasting glucose.
Yeah. And so I think, again, that diabetes condition, like that was sort of a twofold. Biochemical is one part, sure, which, of course they have approved now for prevention. Yeah. So it's not that they don't approve for biochemical. It's just, I think it was in the suite of things that they were looking at as they're going event or diagnosis. And that one they could do, but they already had shown it's prevention. It's already in there. So they kicked it out.
Help me understand the why. Yeah. I get why for a multimorbidity study, which is what TAME ended up becoming, or correct me if that's not exactly the right word.
That's exactly right. It was age-related multimorbidity.
So I understand why you wouldn't want diabetes in there with metformin, because we already know metformin's a good diabetes drug. But as a preventative, why wouldn't you want to show that metformin can be used as a preventative for diabetes? That seems like a good thing. Like, why would FDA push back against that?
Oh, it's because it's already, part of it's that it's already out there. But this was, I think, in the suite, it's already being used that way.
But not approved for that.
Yeah, it is.
It's approved for prevention of diabetes?
I believe it is prevention of type 2 diabetes.
Okay, we'll have to check on that. That's interesting.
Yeah, I would like to, let's fact check that one. Audience.
They'll let us know if we're wrong. No, because I'm not aware of too many situations where FDA has given an approval, a new label indication for prevention. Certainly lots of things are used in off-label for that purpose, but
no, they do actually. So prevention is a real thing, and so are biochemical. Certainly,
it's just harder to do a clinical
drugs.
trial
Statins for cholesterol levels. That's also prevention. Is you don't have to wait until you have the heart attack, and you can start doing with hypercholesterolemia and things there. So it's not that they don't. It's just that it usually takes longer to go down that path to show. Prevention's just harder to prove.
Okay, so. Back to TAME.
Back to TAME. Oh, okay. So where do we go? So then, the funding kind of falls down. We didn't get it through that source. It comes back. The design process was really pretty.
So this was NIH
epic.
You went to first.
Yeah. So we originally went to NIH. We made it through the first round. So to go to NIH, if you have a big budget, which phase 3 trials have a very large budget, and this was the simplest budget we could get because metformin's generic. It was a penny a pill. It cost more to get the placebo than it does to get metformin. So it was not a joke. And so
what was the budget for the first?
From 78 million.
Just say the
okay. Yeah.
words.
No, I think it's
Take
public.
The
it's
off.
public. Yeah. 78 million.
78 million. Okay.
So that is considered a cheap phase 3 trial. Most pharma trials start around the 200 mark. Right. So we were like, hey, this is a budget, guys. Like we're getting this cheap. And so, but it failed on a few fronts, right? So as one was mentioned, geroside hypothesis. Yeah. Reviewers didn't care for.
Which is bullshit. That person should not have been on the review panel.
Agree. Some clinical trial dogmatists, no problem, right? Yeah. Is that they say, well, these composite endpoints are really messy. And this is a great point, is that what if, and this was a question for the field, right? And so what if we ended the trial and you saw an improvement in cardiovascular disease and nothing else? Do you prove your hypothesis? I don't know.
No, but it's a win.
But it's still a win. Exactly right. And so that, that was a real concern, and that we could address it, but could talk about it. And, and that was fine. And then, the other big pushbacks and again, warranted or not, metformin was poo-pooed.
Yeah.
And so
I sort of would personally agree with that. But I also agree you have to take a shot, and I can see the rationale for metformin. I think, again, this is something that most of our audience probably won't care about or resonate with, but you and I probably both have experienced, well, we both have experienced it, that just the real challenges with getting anything big done in the NIH framework or in academia, because, and I don't know if this is an academic mindset, I'd be interested to know your opinion. I sort of feel like it is in general. It's really hard for academics who have been trained to review grants a certain way to evaluate something based on its impact and its likelihood of success versus nitpicking all of the details and all of the things that could possibly go wrong. It's just really hard to get big ideas funded because we're trained as academics to do that sort of nitpicky stuff and not counterbalance that with, well, if this succeeded, what would the impact be? And if it would change the world, maybe we shouldn't be quite so nitpicky on some of these things, right?
Yeah. And so, I think that's where some of the moonshot, and that's where, there's a lot of excitement in taking alternative paths, whether that's going commercial, whether that's going more in the strategic philanthropy where I went, is that there have to be alternative paths. Because not only is there an academic mindset that that's what we're trained to do, but I would say having served on review panels, you're almost rewarded for finding the problems.
Yes.
And not thinking big enough about the impact.
You're right. Yeah, no, you're right. Among your peers, and certainly there, again, I personally never felt that way. And in fact, that's part of the reason why I hated being on review panels. But yes, there is a mindset. And I think some people feel like it's their job to try to point out all of the minor flaws. The problem is they don't necessarily realize when you do that, in a groupthink sort of mentality, it just immediately shifts everything to the negative. And that's enough to derail a really, really good idea. So enough on that. But I think that's part of the, again, that's an unfortunate aspect of the way that academic review process works. And it leads to, in my view, most work being incremental as opposed to really moving the needle.
Right. But then you balance it, right? Is that I think that there still is, I can get angry about it. And it's certainly have had the experience. It's, it is. It's like somebody's walking across a beautiful rug and they snag their toe and all they can see is, and that's what it feels like. But then you have to counterbalance that, right? Is that there is still a place for that level of scrutiny of, needing things to be credible, needing things to be, because now having moved out of that and gone into this other space where there is very much the Wild West and what's real is what you can sell, is that, there's a certain risk on the other side. And so creating an environment where all of those come together and you actually have, I would say, a diverse dialogue from academics to startup leaders to investors. I think that's really where we're finally getting to as a field. And I think it's necessary.
Yep. Still kind of the Wild West in some places, but it's an entertaining, energetic, fun, and frustrating place to be.
Yeah. So speaking of entertaining, do you want to hear some of the bad news?
So let's go for it. Well, so let's just wrap up TAME. Let's wrap up TAME first. So wasn't funded by NIH. I know there were a series of potential philanthropic supporters. None of that ever came through, as far as I know.
Yeah, no, they didn't. So it's, and again, we had a lot of partial backing. And so it's
like, if you can raise the other half, we'll give you this half sort of thing.
Exactly right. And so we had we had a donor that came in with great funds, and then we had people that were going to come in and match. That single donor around 2019 came under completely not to do with TAME or any of the others, but they came under, really great scrutiny. Their company fell apart. They were ousted as a CEO, went through all of this. And the last thing they were going to do was fund the trial. I wish they had just, you know who you are. I wish you had just sold a jet and funded that trial. We would have been good.
Again, could have changed the world, maybe.
Could have changed the world, but it's okay.
Yeah.
And so, so that didn't happen. And so we went through, started trying to build momentum. And then you might have heard about it in 2020. Just when we started getting somebody else, there was a thing
that happened. Yeah.
A thing that suddenly putting money towards prevention for like a geroprotector was really not where the world's attention was, and certainly wasn't where philanthropy was, and for very good reason, because there were some bigger things we needed to deal with. And so in that intervening year, it got cold again. We started getting momentum again with another partial funder starting at I don't know, 21, 22, and that we couldn't raise the rest. Yeah. And so it's not that it's dead, but I left academia like around this time when we were trying to figure out like, where do you get a salvage point, picking it up. If you have this donor, you're going to need to pick it up again, and realized that we were kind of back to where we started 10 years before, which was we lost our contact at FDA. It's been 10 years. We actually need to go back and get this re-vetted. And in order to do the re-vetting, again, the FDA doesn't sit around with a memo pad of what you did 10 years ago. Right. Is that you need to show again, is this the right clinical outcome? Is this the right drug? Is this the right context of use? And so we needed to go back and do all that work again. And I just sort of hit a point where I was like, I'm way too young in my career to feel this old.
Yeah, no, I see. I totally get your personal. I mean, look, I've had frustrations, and I've had much more. I'm older than you, obviously. I have a lot more experience being frustrated with the pace of things. And I would say, so I think you made the right personal decision. And I think probably with TAME, it's going to be harder to get anybody to fund it because, first of all, it's old news.
It is.
Half the people think it's done already.
Oh, it's completely.
It's been started, right?
I get that all the time.
And look, metformin is still, I see the rationale for metformin in this context, but it's not the best shot on goal. If your goal is to significantly modify the biology of aging, It just isn't.
There's other drugs.
So it's a hard sell, I think, at least among informed funders at this point.
Yeah.
I think the design, drugs. The concept, the trial itself, I would love to see it happen. I just wish we could move on from metformin to some of these other things that are more interesting. And obviously I'm interested in rapamycin. I don't even know if rapamycin would be the one I would pick at this point. I think about GLPs, I think about SGLT2 inhibitors, I think about rapamycin. I try to put them all together and say, what is going to be the most pragmatic approach to get across the finish line? But more metformin wouldn't even be on my short list.
Yeah. And so I think actually most of the field has actually come around to exactly what you've said. And so the next big is going to be, is it going to be one of those, or do we actually put some dedicated effort? And again, this is going to be one of those, will be so hard to get funded to try to do that next stage, is build the evidence behind it, actually do a solid, probably preliminary study to figure out which one or combination, or just go all in on right now. You know, there's a lot of energy, a lot of momentum, and a lot of interest around the GLP-1s.
Yeah. And I agree with that. And I think, you know, unfortunately, even rapamycin, if it's the best bet, there's sort of this perception that's old news, right?
You're correct.
So perception trumps reality sometimes.
You're right. It's the trends. I mean, because there have been, like, you know, have been a lot of trends.
I hate to say it, but I almost think that if you went and you said, I want to do BPC 157, you'd get more traction than you would with rapamycin for a TAME trial, right? I mean, it's just the world we live in.
Yeah, you're not wrong. You're not wrong.
So anyways, I hope somebody does
I do too.
Pull this forward and get it off the ground.
It needs to. I mean, I would say, you know, for all of us within the field is, you know, I'm running a prize now. We can pivot, go somewhere different, take a different framework to try to rebuild momentum around the space and have a vetting pool for, you know, again, even if metformin is the thing that goes forward, it's not meant to be the very best of the world. It's supposed to be the start. It's the one, great, you get metformin, you get it through. Now you've set a standard that is hopefully low enough that you can get approvals of other things that are going to be more effective. And you've shown,
again, we touched on this before. Yeah. Most people are pattern matchers. And so you have to show if the first time this can be done, and then everybody's going to be like, oh, well, duh, we should just do that, right? But I agree. Completely.
And so again, whether it's a metformin, whether it's a GLP-1, whether it's a rapamycin, and I would love to see them still happen, and they have to. Because once things come through, again, we're just building that earlier pipeline. I think you're doing it in OptiSpan. We're doing it by running this as a competition. We're going to have these teams come through with these phase 2 trials. We need some desk for those to sit on rather than continuing to slide off the desk. And so that's the goal.
Cool. Okay. So let's have some fun. So actually, so to the extent that you're willing to share the ideas, and obviously you can't share all the details because some of it's proprietary, but what are some of your favorites on both ends, right? Like that you really think these are really great ideas, and wow, that's interesting.
So we have had,
So now we're going back to the XPRIZE, right?
I have been charmed. So we're back in the XPRIZE territory. So again, we've had, at the first round, over 600 registrants. Out of those, I had a lot of sort of short form applications that went in, and then we had some that were full applications with trial structures and others. And I've been charmed across both. We had everything from somebody proposing pheromones to, which did not go well. So again, I'm going to go through some of the
types of pheromones.
Do you really want to know?
Yeah.
So this was from, it gets crazier. I'm so sorry. I'm going to try to avoid any identifiers, but it was, get ready for it.
Was it a specific person's pheromones?
Perhaps the pheromones of Jesus. So again, this was from a religious leader who had the opinion that when you take the sacrament, that you're actually are taking in the body of Christ, and that it's not just what you're eating, but it's actually a pheromone, a smell.
I get it.
And that, so if you have a chance to unlock. So, do I have a problem with somebody sort of blessing over a sacrament and giving it if it gives? I have no idea.
Sure. Yeah.
But that was one of the quick ones. It did not go forward.
I'm not going to make any fun of that idea.
No.
Other than I of course, my scientist mind can't help but wonder, so how do you do the clinical trial?
Yeah. There's reasons it didn't go forward.
Okay. All right. Interesting concept.
So interesting concept.
No
some of my others.
Mouse longevity data for that one, as far as I know.
Have not seen it.
Okay.
Have not seen it.
You should suggest that for the IT.
It'd be a great,
Rich would get a kick out of it.
I would have a blast submitting some of these. We had other cookies. We had other interesting ideas that came forward. We had one that I didn't know where to take it, and I still don't know exactly what they're proposing, but it had a full theory of that, fish don't age the same way as humans. Fish live a long time. Fish eat their, I don't know, but it was at least their theory. Fish eat their fry. So by doing something similar, if humans could do this, they've had this idea that it was sort of like a heterochronic gut biosis thing, but we don't know if they were proposing that we eat caviar and like fish roe.
Oh,
or
yeah. My mind immediately meant what
placenta. We still don't know what was proposed in that one, but we all just sort of sat around and read it and went, that's interesting.
It is interesting, yes.
So we had ideas there. We had, we had everything from crystals and multidimensional.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you get the crystals the
for sure.
You probably get these every once in a while. I get communications, sometimes handwritten letters, which
I love those too.
Creepy.
Yeah.
But yes, the crystals, the penny in the shoe, there have been a bunch of these sort of wacky ideas.
I've had some of those.
Secret to aging.
Have had some of those. But at the same time, can pass some of those off. But then we had some others, like we actually had, I would say, a fabulous application by folks that were doing like meditation. I mean, whether it's going to be the thing that hits across all, but they had really nice clinical studies and clinical support. And, it's one of these, it's
biologically plausible.
It's biologically plausible. Yep. And they're doing, and again, it wasn't just, and I think that this is one of those differentiators, is that you can have some really crazy idea. But if you have a crazy idea and then you start building a system around it, you can test it with credible, rigorous methods and start showing maybe there's something there. And so we had some of those that it's like, if they had written it without evidence, you'd be like, okay, so you're going to do some crystals and some woo-woo, some meditation. But then you have some of these come in and they're like, no. And this is how we're doing it. And this is how we're applying it. And this is how we're testing it. And they've done it in a very scientific, rigorous way.
Great.
Same thing with, you could say, sunlight's going to do it. But then we had teams that are coming in with circadian rhythm based applications that are science and credible and plausible, and they put it together in such a way that there could be an unlock there, either on its own or coupled with something else. So again, some of it really is not just in the innovative idea and the therapeutic, but it's actually all around the approach.
Are any of the projects that have made it forward focusing on some of these, experimental therapies that are now sort of really popular? I'm thinking like sauna, cold plunge, red light therapy. I'm sure you got a bunch of them, but is anybody, because those are things where maybe, right? I'd actually like to see somebody do it well.
Yeah.
And
so out of our top 40s, what I was again so pleased, we gave our judges no rule book. I mean, they had the rule book in terms of credibility, accessibility, all those things, but we didn't tell them you need 25% of applications this or something like that. But they naturally separated out so that we ended up with about 25% of our top 40 winners had drugs. So really sort of classic pharma. Half of those were repurposed, half were new.
Interesting.
We had another quarter that were on the biologic side. The biologic side, you could split between, gene therapies, immunotherapies came in pretty strong, cell-based, plasma-based, so again, exosome kind of thing. So there's, again, a gamut there. That was a quarter. We had another quarter that I would say really leaned in on the nutraceutical supplement or other. And then our last quarter really dug deep on these we called multimodals. And so they're typically coupled with lifestyle. So either exercise or diet or meditation or circadian rhythm based. And many of them had devices that were part of this. So again, whether you're looking at chambers, so, hyperbaric chambers, whether you're doing cold plunge, we saw heat therapies, cold therapies, everything in between is that, a lot of these are things that you could do to, perhaps induce, a hormetic response of some kind.
Or stress reduction. There's a few different ways you could imagine these things working. Yeah,
exactly. And that those that ended up going forward, because we did have some applications in clinics in particular that were like, and this is our entire menu of things that we do.
We want to do everything.
And you were just going to do it all, and you're going to get it all, and you're going to get every supplement we own, and you're going to get all of these repurposed drugs, and you're going to do, these, electrical pulse stimulation therapies of various kinds. But there was no rhyme or reason. So the multimodals that went forward had a very strategic approach, and many of them had really good clinical evidence behind them. They either had flow charts worked out of like when, with biomonitoring, right, of when we see this, it triggers this. And then, and those were great. We even had some that came in, had great clinic structures of doing, again, like digital twins, everyone who comes in, and that this is how we're going to determine. I mean, they could be really great engines for testing the next sort of combination.
Yeah.
If we allow them through and let them start building the evidence.
Yeah, I'm interested, obviously, to see who goes forward. I'm also interested to see, as it becomes more publicly available, what people think they're doing with digital twins. I recently interviewed Corey Funk, who's at the Institute for Systems Biology, and I just sort of feel like, while digital twins are a cool concept, like it's just not computationally not there yet.
No, and some of them definitely use it as a marketing tool. Yeah. And so those who genuinely were sort of like as a marketing tool, because there are some clinics that are doing that. And they're like, and we've got your digital twin. And it's like, it looks cool. It sounds cool. It seems like you're really buying into something, but how it's actually being used is not as clear. Yeah. And so there are a couple of teams, primarily on the academic side, that actually had some footing behind them that they suggest how it could be used. And so now the challenge is getting some of those that had some of those tool sets actually put together with the teams that actually had innovative therapeutic approaches, and they weren't necessarily in the first round paired together. So we've been really trying to encourage matchmaking. As there are so many of these that it's like, you had this great idea and you have this great idea. And if we could just merge them and just make them work together, we can't. We can just put them near each other and make suggestions and see what happens. Sure. It's like we're a dating service for science.
Hey, I mean, if that gets the right group of people together talking to each other, that's fantastic.
I hope
so. Okay, so we could talk all day about the different things that are being tested. So is there anything that we haven't touched on that you want to talk about?
Oh man, I feel like we've really covered quite a big spread. Yeah. Some of the things that I think are also really important, and I might make a shameless plug, is that, again, we have identified a functional endpoint for these trials. This is an approach. It's not the only approach. And so one of the things that we've been working really hard, myself behind the scenes, to get lifted is to actually use the trials as they're ongoing to support discovery science and other validation, biomarkers being a big area. And so have been doing some fundraising on the side to see if we can get a companion prize to the Healthspan prize. Once these top 10 teams go to finals, we're banking samples. They're running trials with common protocols. We've restructured the entire data set to make it easier to do biomarker development, discovery, and validation. And so that there's going to be a data set available and teams that are at the ready that would probably be eager to partner with people who are doing development, whether it's on the wearables, digitals, molecular, cellular side. And so have been trying to put together a companion prize to give those teams a pathway who maybe are on the biomarker side.
So help me understand what that would would look like. So how would a team that thinks they have a strategy for new, better biomarkers of health span, how would they enter a competition? What would that sort of competition look like? What would the prize look like?
Yeah, so it is a bit of a challenge, is that they would need to first have a demonstration phase similar to what we've already talked about, right? So they would need to go in around the time that trials start and show us that they have a biomarker concept or device already ready, that could be added to the trials feasibly, easily, cheaply. You could add those in as the trials are ongoing. We collect the data. For us, the first milestone point would actually be, out of the first teams that we say, yes, these are the best ideas. Those actually go through and use the baseline data from all the existing trials to show, yes, we're showing a correlation with X health feature. And then as the trials on go, right, so then the grand prize would have to actually be parallel to the trials. At the end of the trials is then you would have those longitudinal biomarkers. So you would have some that would say, from baseline, predict the response to an intervention. And then, really the holy grail for surrogates is really looking at those and saying not within any one intervention, but across the interventions in your treated group relative to your randomized now pool of control group, is that you can begin to look at other health characteristics, whether there are functional endpoints of what we call a responder, non-responder, or there might be other really informative metrics that you could get.
Yeah, I think that's a super interesting idea. I'm just in my own head thinking up ideas for what biomarkers I would look at.
Yeah. You've probably done similar within the dog program, right? Is that there's so many things that you could do once you get the base trial going, is that it ends up, I've always thought about it. We had the same thing with the TAME trial. My role in the TAME trial was really around biomarkers and biorepository development. So of course I carried that passion over here. And so doing the same thing, it's like, once you get a trial or a big cohort, it's like a big empty Christmas tree. Your primary outcome is just buying the damn tree and getting it set up.
Right. Absolutely.
And then there's a chance to let people come on and hang their ornaments.
Right.
And I think this is one of the biggest ornaments to hang.
Yeah. No, super interesting. I love the idea. Hopefully you can get some traction there. There may even, in the absence of a prize, be opportunities to partner with people who have particular devices is the easy thing to imagine. And then I guess the other thing I wonder about, and we've sort of touched briefly on epigenetic clocks. You brought that up earlier. There are obvious things to look at to potentially help validate the usefulness of as part of this larger project. I'm assuming some of the teams are going to do epigenetic clocks anyway. I think to the extent that you could think about ways to at least enable that analysis across all of the teams would be interesting. There are blood-based algorithms you can use as well, because there are obviously a lot of questions about these tools and how effective they're going to be in the real world across different populations, across different interventions. That would be interesting, would be valuable to be able to look at that. And maybe just because it's something that I can't help talking about, and I know you've got interesting opinions. We've talked offline about biological age clocks.
Yes.
And so I'm interested, what my opinion is. They know what my opinion is. Interested to know where you land on this concept of biological age clocks and then the epigenetic clocks in particular.
Yeah. So they're not perfect, but some are useful. And so I think, useful does not mean that they're ready to be used in a clinic for clinical decision making. I think there's a lot of ethical questions about that, and I don't think we necessarily understand exactly what they are telling us. I think that they are useful in some context, at least as discussion starters. I think that they have been, there certainly is something interesting and interplay that's happening within that biology of how they were developed and looking across tissues.
And you're talking about the epigenetic clocks.
I'm talking about the epigenetic clocks in particular. Yep. For me, the real question comes in how do we apply them for either clinical decision making or in the context of an intervention? And I don't think that they're validated to to a place yet that we understand what they're doing. And I think certainly, and especially in trying to figure out which intervention to use, I don't know exactly how you would use the information from a current generation of epigenetic clock to do any of that decision making. Is that there's simply not the breadth of evidence available, and there's a lot of reproducibility issues, right? So the test retest and some of those, and I think anybody who's worked on clocks would be the first to tell you that there are concerns.
Unless they work for a direct to consumer company that's selling you the kits, then they probably
totally
wouldn't tell you.
And then they probably wouldn't tell you. But the other thing that I would say is an additional challenge around this is another, I mean, it's a challenge across the field, is that they have gathered enough public attention with people using terms around them willy-nilly to the point that they're almost useless in terms of public opinion. People do not know what they are. They do not know what they mean. They don't know how to use them. And that there's a clock of the week coming out that keeps getting sold and marketed as something else.
Sometimes even before the peer-reviewed paper has been published.
Often
it's kind of scary.
Before the peer-reviewed paper.
I mean, it might be worth just a little bit of nuance here. When you and I are talking about the clock, we're talking about the specific algorithm, which is the specific set of methylation sites that are being measured.
That is right. The CPG methylation sites, right.
But most people who don't understand exactly what these clocks, how they work, when they hear the clock, they think they mean the kit that they get in the mail, right? And there are problems. So there are challenges with the algorithms themselves. First of all, there's 4 or 5 dozen of them now, and which ones work when and where is, I think, yet to be determined. How broadly applicable they are across populations. But there's good information there. Like, I think we can have real scientific discussions around which algorithms make sense where, what are they saying? Do they give us any mechanistic insight? Those are really important and valuable conversations to have. But as soon as you take it out of that and go to these direct-to-consumer companies, then you have the question of whether they're even measuring it right. And are they doing the math right? And what's the reproducibility? That's completely opaque, other than the anecdotal stuff where it just seems to be all over the map, right?
That's right. It's anecdotal. It's money-making. That to me can be very questionable, and that there's no repercussion or consequence for misusing them.
I think you said that you have questions about even whether it's ethical for medical providers to be using them. I do too. I would say, I think it's, I don't know if I would want to say unethical, because I don't know that all medical providers understand what we understand about these tests. I do strongly feel no medical provider should be using direct-to-consumer biological age tests in their practice. And again, the reasons that I've laid out are they don't know the accuracy, they don't know the precision, and as you said, they don't inform care. They're not clinically actionable. And I don't think anybody can argue with those things. So from my perspective, if a provider is doing that and they know those things, that's unethical.
I agree. I think it is unethical, and I think that there are real considerations. I think that there does become an ethical play when these are put into place within a clinic as a money-making tool. That you can't, separate that. Is that, there could likely be things they could get from a standard chem panel that you would pay for $15 a test, and you're going to get in their practice anyway, that would probably be more useful and actionable than paying the $500 for whatever it is. And it becomes a selling point, right, for the clinic to be able to offer these. People are asking for them. And so they really are, meeting a consumer demand because of how widely spread this has been advertised. But it's also at the point of the clinic that they're also doing that advertisement as a way to make money and perhaps getting data, right? They're sharing one tiny measure, an algorithm that's used across all of these CPGs that they may or may not understand. It's a selling point. You get this thing, you don't know what it means, but you're using it as a way to say, oh, and see, and now you should. And it gets like this emotional buy-in to the clinic. And that to me is where the ethics come in, is it becomes, yes, it's out-of-pocket money that probably shouldn't be spent, really questionable, when, that money could maybe go to an MRI that might find something. Or you could put them on a VO2 max test, right? That would take some time, and that you can get a lot of information from that.
Yep.
And so when you have the option in a clinic to do some of these additional and advanced testing, which I'm all for data, all for it, but just collect it carefully, use it rigorously and transparently, and make sure that it's used correctly in a way that's messaged back to the patient that they're part of that clinical decision-making with you, rather than having it used as a sales pitch to encourage them to buy other things at your clinic.
I think you said that really well. So thank you. What do you kind of feel like, are there other things? Like I think of the microbiome tests, and I kind of put them in the same category, at least the direct to consumer. There are places where diagnostic microbiome tests can have a lot of value.
Well, at least you know the microbiome test is shit.
All right. That's a good place to end. No, this has been great.
It's got lots of bugs in it.
Thank you so much.
You know?
We cannot get better than that as a place to end. So anyways, this has been a lot of fun. Really appreciate it. And I hope we get a chance to sit down and do this again.
Oh, I hope we do.
Looking forward to seeing how the XPRIZE Healthspan.
Yeah, I hope we do. And Matt, I've already warned you, you might have to block your calendar. You might get roped into judging. So just so you know.
Unless I put my own.
Yeah, if you put in an OptiSpan team, and then in which case, no, you would not be allowed to judge.
All right. Incentive to join XPRIZE.
Yeah, there we go.
I'm happy to.
All right.
That would be fun.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Great.